welcome to Honey, I Shrunk the Kitch. I am going to work on making a new refrigerator for our dollhouse. The original one I had, I think I got off Facebook Marketplace, and it's always been just a little bit too small for 1 inch, 1 foot scale. Plus, it doesn't accommodate all of our tiny food. So you can see that I've measured out some different dimensions. These are based off of our real life refrigerator, which is about 3 feet wide, almost but not quite 6 feet tall, and 2 feet deep. Now, you can see that that's a lot deeper than this refrigerator, and I'm a little concerned that if I actually make a refrigerator those dimensions, it's going to block the doorway and just take over the entire dollhouse kitchen, which is so unnecessary. So I'm going to make the depth a little bit narrower, more like the original dimensions of the refrigerator, but keep it about 3 feet wide and a little under 6 inches, maybe like 5.5 inches tall. Let's make a paper model of that and see how that looks in the space. And here is our paper model in place. I like the dimensions. It doesn't look much taller than one of the parent dolls, and it's not so deep that it's going to block the doorway into the kitchen. So let's make it. Back in the workshop, I'm going to remeasure my paper model and write down some of the larger dimensions just to make sure that the material I choose is going to be big enough to make all of these cuts. And then we're going to look at my scrap material. I have these pieces of MDF that I found when I was cleaning out my workbench a few days ago. I think this could work, but I'm not thrilled with how thick this material is. I think this might get a little clunky. So let's keep looking. And I found another sheet of MDF. This is actually the backing from a piece of furniture that I took apart a long time ago and saved because it's very sturdy. It won't splinter like wood will, especially plywood that you can get this thin. And it has plenty of room for me to cut out the dimensions that I need. So let's start cutting. Now, something I don't love about working with MDF or pressboard is that although it doesn't splinter like plywood can, it does get kind of fuzzy. This is essentially sawdust mixed with glue and pressed into these sheets. So when you cut it, you're very likely to get some kind of fuzzy edges or even a bit of tearing instead of a nice clean cut. So my way of cutting it is to just take a very sturdy straight edge and a sharp utility knife, make several cuts over the same spot, and then afterwards we're going to prime it, and that should help keep those fuzzies away. So now I've got my pieces cut out, and I'm going to really quickly stack them inside the paper model I made earlier to make sure that the edges are going to fit together really neatly, that everything is lined up before I go to the trouble of continuing to prime and sand and get these pieces ready for construction. I like the way that this is looking, so I'm going to go ahead and get out my 2-in-1. This is Rust-Oleum primer, which I like. I actually ended up giving these pieces about 3 or 4 coats of primer on each side. It's not completely covered. That is completely fine. I just wanted the primer to help keep those kind of dusty, ruffly edges at bay before I get to sanding. I am using a 0 gauge steel wool to sand off all of these edges. It does take a while to sand all of these edges. I pretty much just watched an entire episode of Chicago MD. And at the end of it, I had some nice edges that are perfectly square and ready for construction. Okay, so maybe not an entire episode of Chicago Med, because you can still hear it playing in the background while I'm cleaning up. But that really went through a good bit of a steel wool pad. And now everything is ready for gluing. gluing together miniatures can get really fiddly. So I'm going to set up with some painter's tape. I'm going to have a toothpick for glue spreading and a little bottle cap just to pour my glue into, and I'm going to use this Gorilla wood glue. Let's pretend I'm actually capable of doing all of these tasks so quickly and not just speeding up the video. But anyhow, we're spreading just a very thin line of glue around the edges. And then when we're done, I always take a bit of painter's tape and it just brace it a little bit. Obviously, at this point, it's got the sides helping to brace it too. And that will help to ensure that when it dries, it's drying square and it's drying connected to all the places I need it to be connected. So now comes the hard part, waiting. We are going to wait overnight and then check it in the morning and see how it looks. Well, good news. I'm taking the tape off and everything looks like it's dried really well. I'm still going to hit the edges and some of these corners with a bit of caulk. This tube is pretty much dried up, but I don't need much. So I'm just going to hit it with a little bit of it before I throw the tube out. So while that caulk is drying, we'll go ahead and we'll start working on the shelf supports. And so I found this when I was cleaning up my workshop. I had some cord covers that I used in our kitchen about a year ago, and I have some leftover bits. And see how they slide? I feel like this part of it would be great for just sliding in some little plastic shelves or little plastic drawers. So I'm going to go ahead and use my straight edge to measure 1 inch from the top on both sides. And then that's where we're going to install the first one of these shelf supports. I'm also going to measure and cut this piece of trim. I'm going to cut 4 identically. And then when we dry fit these inside along the lines, I can see that all of our shelf supports are going to line up exactly. Now, before I go and glue these in, I want to try painting this. I'm not sure because I really want this refrigerator to have a really sleek, kind of factory finish look so that it looks like a refrigerator and not a utility closet. Um, I think that I can either try painting it with a high gloss paint, which would be the easiest, or what I might do is end up wrapping it in like contact paper or vinyl or photo paper, something like that. So I'm going to try painting first because if it works, that will be the easiest. I had this paint in my craft supplies. It's folk art outdoor, so it will be a little bit of a stronger paint, and it's white with a high gloss finish. So if any paint is going to turn out the way I'm hoping it will, this is the one. And as I'm painting, I'm just going to do several coats but avoid these lines that I already drew. Now this is after 2 coats of paint, and although I like the finish generally, I can already tell you it's just not going to give me that really sleek appliance-like finish that I want. So on to the next idea. I'm going to use this piece of leftover white contact paper to cover just the inside of this refrigerator. And the way I do it is I'm going to cover the top, middle back, and bottom portions with one strip. And then I'll also cut 2 pieces to cover these sides. And when I do that, I'm going to wrap the contact paper over the edges so that we don't have any of the exposed MDF, even though it's painted white, any of the exposed edges on the front of the refrigerator. I'm using a Starbucks gift card to really smooth down the edges and get really good contact between this paper and the MDF. I find that contact paper it's not as sticky as other things like vinyl that you would use for a Cricut or something like that, which can be an advantage and a disadvantage. So here I'm just trying to make sure that all of my edges will have contact with something else so that they're not as likely to peel up. Speaking of, now that the entire interior is lined with contact paper, I need to be careful how I glue on these shelf and drawer supports. If you glue something directly on contact paper, it's likely to sag over time and try and peel that contact paper up. So what I'm doing is I'm scoring the back side of these slider pieces. Since it is bare plastic, we want to make it a little grippier. Just by you can score it with your scissors or sandpaper it if you like. And I'm also, you can see, scoring in between these lines on the contact paper. So the glue will be able to contact the MDF as well as the contact paper and stick those drawer sliders on really securely. So now all of these drawer and shelf supports are really secure and looking great. So let's work on the doors. I'm going to add this contact paper that I'm using for the interior side of the doors as well. So I'm only going to work on covering one side of the door very smoothly, and I'm going to wrap the other side just like a present. And here's what it looks like all finished. You can see around the edges here what I mean about contact paper not being quite as sticky as some other self-adhesive materials. So I need to just really press around the edges to get good contact there. And now we are going to attach these doors to the base with some duct tape hinges. I cut off about 2 inches of a thin strip of duct tape, and now I'm going to cut it into half-inch sections. I like that with the white duct tape on this project, it will blend in pretty well. We're going to start by attaching the interior side of the door. So I'm lining up my door with the very top edge of the refrigerator. That is going to leave a little space at the bottom to be our toe kick. And then I am going to take my little section of duct tape, holding the door where I want it to fully extend when it's open, and I'm just going to apply it right here. Now, when the doors are closed, the duct tape hinge will work pretty well, but we're going to have this really thin line of exposed sticky duct tape in the corner. And that is just such a terrific place for dust to get stuck and never be able to be cleaned out. So we're going to fix this by also making an exterior duct tape hinge that lines up with it. I'm taking a matching section. I'm holding the door the way I want it to look when it is fully closed, and I'm matching up my duct tape hinge so that it covers that interior hinge space. So now that our hinges are attached, we can work on covering the exterior. I think the best way to get a really glossy, high sheen kind of look to the outside of the refrigerator will be using a sheet of this high gloss photo paper. But there's an opportunity here to make things far more complicated. So I'm going to take that and I'm going to make these doors magnetic. I have in the craft supplies some of these packages of magnetic strips. And if I add these to the outside of the door and then cover it with photo paper, my kids will actually be able to make little magnets and stick them onto the refrigerator. So we're going to do that. We're going to glue down these magnets to the outside of the doors. And I've really only had to do a little bit of trimming and piecing to get the magnet strips to be a perfect fit. I'm using some of my Beacon 3-in-1 glue to hold down the non-adhesive side of the magnet strips. And that dries really quickly so that we're ready to get on with covering the entire exterior. My photo paper has a glossy side, which I want to be on the outside of the refrigerator. So on the back side, I am going to trace out a template just like I did when I made the paper model. As you can see, I got these crisp folds by using my straight edge and my scissors to just score along the wrong sides. That when I went to wrap it all the way around my refrigerator, it looks seamless. I'm going to use my Beacon 3-in-1 glue to glue it all the way around the sides. And then I'm also cutting out an exact fit for the front of each door. For this, I only have to peel off all the adhesive backing on the magnets, and then I can just stick down the door fronts. So having the magnet sheets on the doors does make it a little bit front heavy. Normally that wouldn't be a problem because the box of the refrigerator weighs more than the doors do. And if I'd used, they do have thinner magnetic sheets that if I'd had those on hand, I probably wouldn't be having this problem. But anyhow, to counterbalance it just a little bit, I'm going to stack a couple magnets to put in the back bottom of the refrigerator, and then another little bit of this leftover drawer slider in the front. And then I'll cover them both with some extra white contact paper. I'm going to have to stack it a little bit to cover up the darkness of the magnet. But then that should help counterbalance it just a little bit. See, this slider section at the front is lighter and it's hollow, and the magnet section toward the back is much heavier. And that's going to just add a little bit of weight to the back of the refrigerator. It's still not going to be perfectly balanced, but I'm going to hold off on modifying it any more than that because I may, depending on how the kitchen comes together as I'm finishing up cabinets and things like that, I may decide to just glue it in place. The dollhouse is on a turntable, so it may not be perfectly level. So I'm going to wait to make any more permanent glued down modifications and just make it as balanced as I can for right now. So, with that in mind, to make the toe kick at the front of the refrigerator black instead of white, I'm just going to use this really thin strip of electrical tape. I'm also going to use a fairly light material to make the handles. So I like the look of kind of metal handles on a white refrigerator, like copper or gold or something like that. So I took these bobby pins, I've trimmed off one side already, and I'm going to measure to get the placement right. But then I'll use my utility knife to make a little mark and try and just scoot in this curved edge into there. Then I'll be able to use a squirt of super glue to make it secure without adding a ton of weight to these doors. And with that, we're on the home stretch. I like these little blister packs that so many things come in. The plastic part is strong enough to really be useful for a lot of miniature projects. So I looked through my little stash and I found this one. I think it could be a really cute little drawer. And I used that as a template to cut some other scrap plastic up to make some shelves. These kind of brittle plastics can't really be recycled, at least not in my community. So I try to save, good looking pieces of it or things that are especially strong. I'll try to find a way to reuse. And it also means if I find a deeper drawer someday or one of them gets busted while a kid is playing with it, it's okay. We'll replace it. But I'm really liking, I think this is a fun detail that we'll be able to remove the shelves if we need to store something tall or move them around if we want the drawer higher or lower. I think that's something I would have just loved when I was a kid. So we are going to add that detail now. And then we're going to stock this refrigerator. So, of course, one of the first things we're going to put in is our country crock containers for holding all kinds of leftovers, as well as the more modern Tupperware that my kids made. You can find our tutorial on how we made those here. And then we can also stock in some of the fun store bought mini food that we got off of Facebook Marketplace. Thank you so much for joining me for this project. If you're interested, I hope you'll subscribe and follow along for some more of our mini adventures. And before we go, let's close it off by demonstrating one of the most fun little elements of this project, the magnetic doors. My kids were able to take some stickers they had and stick them onto a few of these leftover magnet strips and cut them out so that their refrigerator too can have their very own artwork and custom magnets. This is really fun. Thank you for joining me, and I hope I'll see you again next time when we post our next mini project.